Hello. Good evening. I'm experiencing so many emotions at the same time right now. First of all, great relief. Ooh. There we go. I have a sensation of incredible relief because, as you may have heard, I'm stepping down as chairman of the board of the MacDowell Colony next spring, which means this is my last chairman's evening that I'm going to be hosting in this way. Is this our 7th or 8th? I can't remember. And I've always had before in previous years this feeling of a very powerful need not to mess it up. And I don't want people saying, yeah, we can't have Michael come back and do that again next year. But I don't have to worry about that tonight. But even more than that, just such excitement at the guests who are joining me here this evening. These artists are, both of them, I mean, I've probably said this to some degree in previous years about other artists we've had, but these artists have made such a profound difference to my ability to withstand life. And got me through in various ways. Reading their work helped me understand things both about my own personal experience, about art and how it's made, about the times that we're living through. And I don't just mean now. Encountering Laurie's work when I was a college student helped me make sense of the way the world felt to me at that time and the possibilities of being a creative artist that might be opening up to me then. And for Margaret as well, just encountering a writer early on who seemed to not give a shit about genre distinctions, about whether she was writing science fiction or what's called realistic fiction or naturalistic fiction, or incorporating fairy tales and many other kinds of genre work, crime fiction and so on, into her very clearly literary works of art was so significant to me. So I'm so excited to have both of you here. Thank you for joining me. And I was saying this to you a little bit before we started, and I say it every year, I'll repeat it now. The original idea behind these chairman's evenings was to try to, in some ways, suggest or hint at the experience that MacDowell Fellows have every night when they go to sit down for dinner in Colony Hall, and of course, and many other locations around the MacDowell campus, of being exposed in a prolonged way to other creative artists working in disciplines that are not their own discipline. So for me, it's always such a surprising, positive influence on my work and an inspiration, and just interesting to be sitting at dinner between a visual artist and an architect, or between a poet and a choreographer, and to talk about what they're doing, hear what their approach to their work is like, and then start to see, even though it seems the work we produce seems so different in so many ways, that actually we're coming at it, and we may be coming at it in different ways, but the underlying things that we're trying to accomplish and the ways that we're accomplishing them have a strange commonality. And so this is once again true of both Margaret Atwood and Laurie Anderson. Although each of you has worked outside of you're very hard to categorize exactly what your discipline is, Laurie, although I think you tend to get thought of as primarily someone who works in music or composition, but there are a lot of ifs, ands, or buts to that. And Margaret, although you're primarily known as a writer of fiction, of novels, you've written comic books, as I well know, because my youngest brother, Dan Chabon, has been your editor, and at Dark Horse Comics, and you've worked with theatrical productions, and you have a history as a cartoonist, I believe. So, nonetheless, I'm hoping that some interesting things will result from the conversation tonight. The first thing I thought I would start by asking you about is, you both have incorporated narratives of childhood into your work, and narratives drawn from your own separate childhoods. And I think from what I know, from what I've read about you, and from exposure to your work and the heart of a dog, and in many places where you seem to be drawing on your childhood. You come from different kinds of families. You came, Laurie, from a very large family, right? How many siblings?
There were 8 of us.
8 of you. And then Margaret, it was a relatively small 3. But I guess what I noticed, Margaret, you've talked a lot about how you spent so much time in the woods as a child, right? And nature. And Laurie, though you grew up in suburban Chicago, you've talked a lot about...
In the woods.
In the woods, too. So you talked a lot about the sort of, or you seem to have had both been given a lot of freedom as children. And I thought I'd just start by asking you, when you look back, does that seem, in hindsight, like you were given a rare gift, or was it just so commonplace at the time? Or
It was commonplace.
mm-hmm. Is it on? Oh, maybe.
Oh. Yes, people didn't pen their children up in those days. When were you born? How old are you?
I'm 72.
Oh, you're a mere child.
Yeah.
I don't want to say in those days because they might not have been your days, but
No,
I think
they were my
your days
days.
were close enough.
Yeah.
So that they weren't penning.
Are you just getting softer? and
Something
softer?
happened.
Oh, no, that's good.
There,
That's good.
there we are.
Yeah.
Okay. So 72, therefore you were just post-war. Okay. So in the 50s, when you were quite a young child, you were probably let to roam around quite a bit. Yeah, they just used to, as long as you were back before it was really dark, kids roamed around in groups and did quite a lot of things they probably shouldn't have done.
I mean, I had the same experience. I'm 56, and my mom would say goodbye and be back at dinner time, and that would be it. I wouldn't have to account for my
Where
time.
was this happening?
In suburban Maryland in the
Oh,
70s. But do you, I mean, for me, I don't have, I do feel looking back that there was some kind of connection between, for example, things I was reading at the time and the play that I engaged in out of doors, and that in some ways that might have fed into the things that I ended up writing. I mean, do you think, looking back, that if you hadn't had that kind of freedom that you were given, if you'd been confined, penned in the way that kids tend to be today?
For a while, people were being very protective of children, but something that's made a comeback is now the forest school or the outdoor school. And with that, they just establish a perimeter. They don't want the kids.
happening?
It's happening in Brooklyn.
Yeah,
And other places too, but
it's
it's this book called Last Child in the Woods, I think, made quite an impact in Japanese forest bathing and the studies they have done on that.
Forest bathing?
What is
Forest bathing is going for a walk in the woods. It's what they call it. But they've done
Naked?
studies on no, you just have to walk in the woods, and they've done studies on heart rates and white blood cells and levels of aggression and these things. And there's a botanical chemist in Australia who has distilled essence of cut grass and used that in various studies, including criminals in jails. And the level of aggression just goes right down. Now you know why you feel sleepy after you've been mowing the lawn. So there's really something to it. It's real.
How close do you feel, each of you, to your childhoods now? Do they still feel as close as they ever have? Do they feel close?
When you get to a certain age, you forget the middle part, and it all comes back.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Is that what's happening to me yet?
Yeah.
No.
No.
But it will.
What kind of things do you remember when somebody says? What kind of kid
unfortunately, I have a pretty good memory. So I can remember all kinds of things. I can remember all the people in my grade 4 classroom.
Wow.
I can remember enormous amounts of detail about the teachers. If anybody's been a teacher, you are probably an indelible image in some grown-up's mind right now. Yes, because when
spend all day staring at them.
You spend all day staring at them
Scrutinizing them,
yes, itemizing them,
Yeah.
their wardrobes. Yes.
But I was very struck when I was reading about you each that you both seem to have even there's a certain impression of well-roundedness that emerges in both of your, like you were a cheerleader apparently?
Were you a cheerleader? Oh, wow. Were you the person at the top of the pyramid?
No, we didn't do
No, you
pyramids.
didn't do
No pyramids.
No, because
And you
you're
were
quite light.
Were you selected to participate in some kind of like home economics competition of some kind?
Oh, you want to hear about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was this was the 50s. So you know Betty and Veronica?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this was Betty and Veronica, the baking stage of Betty and Veronica, when they made a lot of cookies.
Mm-hmm.
It was the 50s.
Which one were you, Betty or Veronica, or with kind of a mixture of both?
Oh, it was a mix.
Uh-huh.
But as for the home economic, it was the Miss Consumers Gas, the Consumers Gas Miss Homemaker contest. And you had to have a partner from your high school. And my partner was called Sally. And Sally went off to the finals, and we had to make a meatloaf, a baked potato, in a gas stove. What you always want to have for dinner. And some
It had to be done with gas. That was
it
the
had
point.
everything
I
had to be
see,
done with
I
gas.
see.
Some boiled frozen peas, and in those days they had gas irons. You may not remember that. But they did.
How's that
Briefly, they had gas irons. I think something may have happened.
It doesn't, on the surface, it doesn't sound like a good idea.
They discontinued them. So we had to iron a shirt with the gas iron, and then we had to do a third gas-related thing, which I repressed. But we did not win.
You didn't win?
No, but we got some very nice charm bracelets.
It's
Tell
surprising
about
how-
cheerleading. What was your outfit?
I was just thinking about how competitive home economics was.
Well, it
They
was
really,
very.
Oh,
No.
Ours was
Was
very
it?
competitive. Yeah, and
What did you have to do?
sew things.
Well, we sewed things, but yeah, we had a home economics teacher who was devoid of a sense of humor. She cared about what things looked like on the inside, and I cared about
stuff.
yes, I cared about what they looked like on the outside.
Very wise. Yeah.
That's what I think.
It's like the difference between Judaism and Christianity.
Okay, being a strict agnostic, which is which?
Judaism, all that matters is what you do. You obey the commandments. It's all outward,
the outside.
And Christianity, you
Oh,
have to
wow.
have a clean soul.
I
Is
don't
that
know.
so?
As a Swedish evangelical mission covenant person, I'd have to say, well, that's a good
Yeah, you see, somebody heard
I
you.
always try to ring a bell when you say that.
Like Laurie, I know one of your early works that you got a lot of attention for doing involved ice skates, and ice skating is a part of your growing up in the woods outside Chicago, and then in Heart of a Dog you tell the story of this childhood event that involved babies or small children falling through the ice, and but that was your fault, and then you saved them too, and that was your redemption. At least that's how I remember. I watched it a couple of years ago. But
It's
is that
interesting
about right?
Well, it's interesting that you say redemption because we had just come. I was in charge of taking two of my little brothers to the movies, so I took them to, because we skated everywhere because it was cold and frozen. I had taken them to see the Ten Commandments, but it was so long. I didn't know it was part two. You were talking about the part two that you just saw.
Oh yeah, Inheritance.
And so we left, but I just do remember that it was one of the best days of my brother's life because we went to the movies and he was just they were twins, very little, and one of my sisters had just gotten a job being a candy girl at the theater, and this blew their minds. She was in charge of all the candy, standing there, and all this candy behind her and popcorn. And they were like, "Can that be real?" That was like, So I remember that day really, really well. That was also the day I almost drowned them. So they fell through the ice, and it was part of this film that was involving my childhood. But they were wearing the little ball hats, and I was taking them to the island to look at the moon, and the ice cracked, and the stroller just sunk below the water. I was like, my first thought is, Mom's gonna kill me. So I took my jacket off.
Were they strapped in?
They were strapped in.
Oh, no.
They were strapped in. So Craig, I went down and got him and pulled him out and unstrapping him and threw him on the ice and went down to get Phil. And I couldn't find him because the stroller had kind of slid down the surface of the bank of the island under the ice. And so I dove down twice, and he was strapped in, so I couldn't get him out.
This is horrible.
It was horrible, and so I finally did get him out, and I was very motivated. And I brought these two little screaming little boys back, and I came into the kitchen that day, and my mother's there, and I told her what had happened. And she just waited a beat, and she said, I didn't know you were such a good swimmer.
I bet you
Such
you
a good
didn't
diver.
know either, yeah.
Yeah, that was, my whole life changed that day. It really was, as a kid, that made I hadn't just almost killed my brothers. I was somehow a hero, but very, very undeserved. Just completely undeserved.
Well, not really. You did save their lives.
Yes,
You
after
did
almost
not
killing
almost
them,
drown
yes.
them on purpose. It was not your fault.
Exactly.
That's what I keep telling
It
myself.
was not your fault.
50
Clear.
many, many years later. How long does it take to figure out that it's not your fault?
Well, I suppose it depends how often you were told it was your fault.
Yeah.
Throughout your childhood. Yeah.
I think that's very, very key. Yeah.
So when you was there any connection, conscious or unconscious, do you think, when you performed this piece that, if I'm correct, it involved you're playing violin, you were wearing ice skates, the ice skates were embedded in a block of ice, and then when the ice had melted, however long that took, the piece was over? Is that right? Did it have any connection to what happened?
No.
Just okay.
Couldn't possibly have had a connection. No.
How hot was the day?
Yeah, that's another question I did wonder. How long on average did it take for that?
Oh, sometimes it just cracks right away because you're kind of off balance. And playing the violin, you're always off balance. You're bowing and you're shifting, and so you're cracking the ice. The point of that was it was a self-playing violin that I'd invented. So it would play by itself, and so then you play duets with it, and there, because it's a loop, there's no beginning necessarily or end. So I needed some way to shape the piece. So that was just how long it took to melt the ice.
Well, you know what they say in Gypsy, the musical. You got to have a gimmick.
You gotta have a gimmick.
Exactly.
That's it. This was also the 70s too. We had gimmicks like that in the 70s. It was a very gimmick-ridden time.
Well,
Yes.
you mentioned this kind of violin that you invented, and that something that I also noticed when I was preparing to talk to you too is that this is unquestionably the first Chairman's Evening in which both of my guests have, in addition to everything else they do, been inventors. And in fact, if you look on your Wikipedia entry and your Wikipedia entry, it says the various things you're known for, and in both cases it says inventor, which I think is both cool and kind of curious too, because it's not a
Thing that women do.
Well, it's not a thing that women. It's not a thing that women are necessarily known for, though they have been inventors. They just haven't been known for it sufficiently, except for, like, you hear that
Hedy
Lamarr and the guy from the Monkees whose mom invented whiteout. But there's that, but also just inventors generally are. It's now invention is done by corporations and it's done by big labs, and it's there are that we used to make inventors in a sense in this country, and now fewer people are known for being inventors.
I think there's still people who
They're still
tinker.
out there inventing.
Yeah, there are people in
They're
their
in their
garages. making
garages,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we should have
Absolutely.
them come to MacDowell. Maybe we should have inventors come to MacDowell.
MacDowell doesn't have any garages.
Okay, that will be for my successor. Can
You can say
make that happen.
MacDowell is all garages, but actually it doesn't have any really messy, junk-filled garages of the kinds that inventors need.
Well, we're going to get those. And I wonder if you could just talk about, in each of your inventions are very different from each other, but if you just each talk about
the pen.
Talk
Yes.
about your invention, because I want to hear about your, apart from the self-playing violin.
why are
what
you
else did
an
do?
inventor? I guess I'd say, what is it about what you were doing or are doing that then sort of has it obliged you to become an
Okay,
inventor?
let me go back into her past. 8 children. Okay, 8 children. There was a certain amount of making do, I would suppose. So, and similarly, growing up in the woods, there was no shop, there was no store, you couldn't just go get stuff. So you never threw out a nice piece of bendy wire, because you might need it for something. In fact, you never threw out anything. You would be surprised at the kinds of things you didn't throw out. So multiply that by the Depression followed by the war, and you really never threw out anything. And I expect...
I threw out a lot of things, actually.
Well, but what about your family when you were growing up?
We were pretty cavalier about throwing stuff away.
Were you?
too.
Well,
Yeah.
you must have been the generation after the war then, in that case.
Well, one of the things that I feel very lucky about is we had money.
Oh, you had money.
money.
Oh, that's different then.
And here's the great thing about that is that I learned really from a very early age that it didn't make anybody happy. It just didn't do it for, people were very unhappy around me. And so that was never my goal. I never thought this is really going to be a thing that I have to have. So that was my biggest, I was very privileged in that way. But I was also, we had to do a lot of things too. It was a very sort of achievement-oriented thing. So my mother was the scout leader, for example. So you have to be last and best.
Boy or girl Scouts? Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts?
I was a Girl Scout.
You were, but did she was she a den mother too for the brothers or?
No.
No, I see.
She stuck to the Girl
I
Scouts.
see. She stuck to the Girl Scouts.
That's a cool question. Then were you a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout?
I didn't mean that. You have brothers. I thought they must have been
Scouting thing.
Cub
I
Scouts.
don't want to assume anything. Just
They were den
So
mothers.
how far did you go in that organization?
Yeah, how far?
How many badges did you get?
a lot of badges.
A lot,
Did
yeah.
you do it?
Is it Girl Guides in
It
Canada?
was
or-
a
Girl
bad,
Guide?
yes, they
Girl
were called
Guide with
Girl
the beret?
Guides. Yeah, well, it was worse because I went to brownies first. Did you do that? Did you have the mushroom?
We didn't eat
Wait.
mushrooms.
No, it wasn't.
It'd be great
It
if you were
wasn't
taught
not
to
a
do that.
mushroom that you ate. It was a cardboard mushroom that you danced around.
Mushroom worshipping early.
Yes, it was a large cardboard mushroom, and
Wow.
the head of the brownies was called Brown Owl, and the second in command was called Tawny Owl. Now, these were not kinds of owls that we have in North America, so it was all very
is
weird.
higher
They're
than
British.
Tawny Owl.
Brown Owl was the head of it, and the second in command was called Tawny Owl, and the brownies were all organized into groups of fairies, gnomes, elves, and pixies.
Wow.
You didn't have this?
There's a
I guess
really
they'd-
strange kind of roots of Handmaid's Tale in
No
this,
kidding.
like the way.
Well, no,
Martha's
no, the dancing around the mushroom is not something they do in the Handmaid's Tale.
No, it's
they
kind
might
of the
like
dark
to
version.
have done it, but they didn't actually do it. Yeah, so I think I came from an early period an earlier period of brownies and
Yeah.
Girl Guides
Yeah,
than,
that's very
than you did.
hierarchical with all those layers.
Well, so when you were a brownie, what did you do?
Just brownies. We didn't have levels. We had badges.
You had no little
but
pixie
we
pins
went
and
hiking
things?
and
You did hiking.
Yeah.
It sounds
hiking
kind of
and
boring.
Bird identification.
Sounds boring. We had a little song for each of the fairy elven groups. So it was
you remember
Lady.
how they
Oh,
went?
sure. Yeah. You're not going to make me do this.
Well, just a couple lyrics, that you might recall.
We're going to make you.
You don't have to sing it.
Here we are, the something or other elves. Help,
Here we are.
helping mothers, not ourselves.
Wow.
Oh, that's
so nice.
It was all like that. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yes. Well, you didn't even have the queen in your salute, did you?
The queen. And
We don't have
I
that
promised to do my duty to God and the queen.
Oh, yeah.
Here. Oh, no, we say
Whoa.
God in my country.
And to help others every day, especially those at home.
Oh, we had that.
You had that, but you
Yeah, we had
didn't
that.
have any queen in it.
No, we didn't have.
No.
the queen.
Or king.
Was that a comfort to you to have a king and queen? Or a
Well, who
burden?
knows? There's no. Since I've never not had a king and queen, I don't know how lacking in comfort I would have been otherwise. But let me say, what have you got? You've just got the president,
I don't
right?
find comfort in that. Well, I think
Doesn't that make you a bit jealous now?
I don't know. I mean,
bit.
he acts like a king, so I don't feel deprived. I mean, a lot of our presidents have been either sort of kings or bad boy princes. They don't act like presidents particularly.
Some of them have
Well,
been like
some of
queens.
them have been quite presidential. Really? Don't you think? Abraham Lincoln.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was a good one.
Yeah.
From Illinois.
And then
Like
there
Lincoln.
was.
Inventions. What happened?
Let's get back
Where-
to that.
what happened,
Could you
ladies?
talk about your pen, please?
You
Oh,
just
the
don't
pen.
want to talk about
All
it.
right. Okay. The pen. The pen. I originally invented the pen because it was the age of book tour, the dwindling returns on book tours. Lots of cities didn't get book tours. Lots of authors didn't get book tours. What am I doing to this mic?
No.
And when the FedEx person came to my door with a little tablet you wrote on, I foolishly thought that the signature was flying through the air and coming out in the form of ink somewhere else. So I said, why can't we use this for book signings in cities that people aren't sent to and nobody gets to have any, and also countries you don't want to go to? So I shared this. This is 2005, and none of the technology we currently use was available yet. So I shared this with somebody who knew something about it, and then they laughed a lot. I said, that isn't what's happening when you sign the FedEx thing. They say, you're laughing a lot. So I said, okay, it doesn't happen, but could it happen? And so we did some research, and it did not happen. It had not been done. The closest thing to it was remote surgery. But let me just point out, you do not scribble on a body with your scalpel. It doesn't go very fast with the remote surgery. So there were some things about the remote surgery that were similar, but other things that were not. So we set out to invent this thing that didn't exist so that we could do remote book signings. Originally, that was the idea. And we went through 4 iterations of it, one of which blew up and flew across the room. And yes, it did. It was going too fast. It was along the lines. No, it was not gas powered, but it was. It had the pen in a round thing like a vinyl record, so it could move quite quickly. And that wasn't going to work. So then we did one that was quite big and was very accurate, because of course it had to be extremely accurate. Book collectors were not going to settle for anything that was not exactly the signature. But it wasn't scalable. It was a certain size and you couldn't make it smaller.
I see.
So finally we hit upon the one that we're currently using, And it is part of a larger system which allows you to sign digitally, store digitally, but if you need the absolutely accurate pen and ink signature, which you do for a lot of purposes, you can have it through the thing that will then reproduce whatever you wrote in the first place. So it's now called syngrafii.com. You can look it up on your...
Catchy.
Well, it's not particularly...
It was called the long pen. Why didn't they like
Yeah, that's what I thought, but nobody listens to me.
But I mean, that's impressive because it was a little bit of a somewhat quirky application that initially appealed to you, but now it's this thing that
it worked all around
corporations
the
use
world,
for-
but they couldn't figure out how it was actually going to be deployed in, how are you going to do it, in bookstores or what. We're coming back to it. We can do it. It's just a question of, who would you do it for? But the main applications are business, high-level contracts, mortgages, the military, government, stuff like that.
And all because you didn't feel like going to...
No, it's not that
Lithuania
I didn't
or-
feel like going there. You've got it backwards.
Okay, I see.
I would never be sent there because you know what publishers do.
I see.
They send you to the places that report to the New York Times.
Mhm.
And if you happen to live in a city that doesn't report to the New York Times, too bad for you. So we had it. We had it so, and you did this yourself.
Yeah, I know. I
We
was
had
one
a
of the
video chat.
testers.
We had a video chat with a lot of people watching, and then you signed books for them.
First, you led the entire room in a round of happy birthday because it
That's
was my
true.
birthday.
It was your birthday. Yeah. Yeah. So Norman Mailer's last public appearance was by the long pen.
Oh, wow.
He was in his house over here, and he was appearing in Scotland. And he takes a look at the Scottish audience of 600 enthusiastic Scots, and the first thing he says is, "I hate technology." And I particularly hate this technology. And then we realized he couldn't hear. He was deaf, so we just turned up the volume. And then he realized he could see, he could hear, and here were all these Scots, hanging on his every word, and he let rip with full Norman Mailerhood, and then he signed their books.
Wow, so I did have it. I was just projecting my own misanthropy onto you because I thought it was a way for you to just stay home in your pajamas and never have to go anywhere.
My
Which is my
pajamas.
dream.
My pajamas. What are these pajamas of which you speak? I never sleep.
You just wear that all night? That's
And I mean, this is. I do want to say, like, you are in the middle of an insanely long book tour for the new book, the sequel to Handmaid's Tale, and it's so good of you to take time for us in the middle of all this. I did want to mention
I owed you, Michael.
for the long pen.
how long is your book tour?
Never mind.
Okay. We're quits now. We're good. We're even. What
But
about?
I really like that remote thing. That's really fantastic. I
Maybe
think
you
that's-
could incorporate it into a musical
I've tried
thing.
to do some remote concerts, and they really don't work that well. I was doing a project with the artist Ai Weiwei, and he said, "Would you write an anthem for your motherland?" And I'll write an anthem for my motherland. So I thought that was a good project, and we did that. And he, in Toronto, actually.
He's kind of on the outs with his motherland
A little
at the
bit,
moment.
yeah. But that makes the song better, It's like, so he wrote this thing and appeared because he was under house arrest, couldn't arrive. So it was a big Skype screen, and he.
Just
Skyped,
when he was still in house?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and all the things that can go wrong with Skype at home go wrong in a giant screen in the concert. So you're singing away, and the image freezes, and
It always freezes on the worst facial expression
yeah.
possible, right?
And the words continue, but it was. I think there's a lot of potential for people doing stuff like with that, and it really makes it. It's better than flying everywhere. I think in the moment.
Yes, for green
many
reasons, and
reasons,
that's certainly one of the things that we attached to our pitch. I once did a holographic projection of myself to Sweden,
Wow.
So in Sweden, there was a man sitting at a table, and it appeared as if I was sitting at the table with him, although I was in Toronto, and we had a nice chat, and I handed him a book, and he handed me a rose. We used a third person behind a split black curtain, of course. Little did we know, however, that we burned out everybody else's Wi-Fi for miles around. It takes up a lot of bandwidth.
That was worth it.
That's plenty. Well, so Laurie, your inventions have what drives you? What drove you when you the first thing that you just developed as a musical instrument? Was it the violin with the tape for a bow?
Those things are all about having a studio that doesn't have any particular boundaries. So if there are a lot of the studio that I have is music and visual stuff, and there's no real boundary. So that, for example, if I'm projecting some things, and then I would have a white bow. I remember that day when the projector is coming up, and I just was going like playing and then going like this, and then there's a hologram suddenly, and it was really exciting. So if you do like this in front of the image, there's just a crazy suspended thing, and it's there's nothing simpler than just interrupting the image like that, but it's very magic. So they're really made of stuff that's trying to fix something that didn't work. I was working, for example, with a little drum machine, and I was taking it apart, and suddenly I realized that the sensors for this Lindrum machine were cables for the sensors were much longer than they needed to be. So I thought, I'll just make this, make them into a suit so that you can pound on your knee, and you have like a snare drum, and then poof, your heart, and so it's tinkering stuff, it's just like doing things, and then figuring out a different thing for them to do if they're broken. Another one was a table that I made of I was typing something with an electric typewriter that had a motor, and I was like reading what I'd written, and it was so horrible, so stupid. I was just going like, this is, and then I heard this the motor of the typewriter coming up through my bones, and I thought, okay, I'm going to build a singing table. So I built it in the basement of the Museum of Modern Art because they'd asked me to make something for them, and so the table worked through bone conduction. So it's like putting on a pair of very, very high-powered headphones, really. And so bass, it mostly started with bass, so that because the bass frequencies are loopy and long, and so there was a Fender Rhodes bass line in one ear, and then an acoustic piano bass line in the other, and they slowly pan and cross through your head like this, and then finally got some language to work, and which is much harder because language is made of fricatives, and so without all these little all you hear is so finally getting those to come up through a piece of metal, a driver, and compress them and come up through your bones was hard to do, and so I made.
Were you playing this with your elbows?
Yeah, you just listen to your elbows. You put your elbows on a contact point where the sound is being driven and compressed up through a bar, and then I love sirens. I used let's see, a line from George Herbert for the first language thing, which was a poem that he wrote, this 17th century English metaphysical love poet, who wrote a poem to music, and it was now I and you without a body move, and so in the table you hear in one elbow you hear now I in you without a body, and then move slowly crosses through your head, and it's a wonderful feeling to feel this great hollowness of that you can feel sometimes when you hear really extreme stereo, and you know your head is like packed with all this meaty stuff. But when you can feel the wind blowing through it, it's really relaxing.
When you were young, did your mother used to tell you to get your elbows off the table, to keep your elbows? Is this a form of rebellion?
No.
No.
We were allowed to have our elbows on.
Oh, yeah, you bet. Okay, so one thing that I think seems true about both of you is that you're both, because of your engagement with technology in various ways and your obvious lack of fear of technology as something to play with and experiment with and use, you've also both been very engaged with the future in different ways in your work and in your practice as artists. And so here we are in the future. I did this thing in Los Angeles where Margaret was given an honor at the Hammer Museum, and there was just this constant refrain. This was within the last year or so. This constant refrain of people talking about her, speaking about her, saying basically some version of "you were right." And I talked a little bit about what an awful burden that can be to have been right. But do you want to just? Did you expect, each of you as kids, looking forward to the future as young people, did you tend to be more of a sort of optimist or pessimist? And did you always have a more dystopian view or a more utopian view of things? And what do you think about our chances now?
Oh, your chances now. There isn't any the future, by which I mean it's not graven in stone. There isn't this sort of single fate that we're all fated by. There's multiple futures. There's an infinite number of multiple futures, and the one we're going to end up in later is going to depend on what we do now. So there isn't a single the future. We talk as if there is, but there actually isn't. So that's the good part.
That's the good news. Are you? Well, what about that? When you were, growing up.
I grew up with the biologists, so they knew all of this stuff that everybody is now concerned about. They knew it in the 50s. Like what? Species extinction, too much methane being produced, pesticides. Herbicides. Rachel Carson was the first, and she certainly got a big load of shit thrown at her. But the biologists were aware. It's just that it took everybody else quite a long time to pay attention to it. And if they had done in 1972 what the Club of Rome was talking about then, if they had started then, we wouldn't be here now. But it's not too late. It's not too late.
But you absorbed. So you absorbed a fairly, not pessimistic, but a not a dewy-eyed, optimistic sort of.
Well, okay. So chemistry and physics don't care about you. I hate to break this news. They actually just don't care about you. People should care about other people, but thunderstorms couldn't care less. And therefore it's up to people to figure stuff out, because chemistry and physics are not going to bend to your will just because you want them to. So, yeah, in that sense, dewy-eyed optimism, no. But I'm a cheerful person. Enjoy the moment. You have one. You're not dead yet. This is the good part.
Laurie, what about you?
I have a kind of an apocalyptic streak, I have to say, and probably because of...
Is that the Swedish evangelical?
Growing up with the atom bomb.
Probably largely due to a grandmother who was a missionary and was a kind of a hellfire person, and was convinced that it was very, very soon it was all going to just be devoured in fire. So somehow
except for the righteous.
Yeah, there would be a few.
Such as her. Yeah.
Yes, and she was
none of us.
Well, she tried. She tried. She was a missionary in Japan. She went there and did not bother to learn Japanese. Why?
That makes it tough.
She kind of sang hymns and hoped they'd get the drift of,
They'll catch on.
How long did that last?
Quite a while.
Quite a while.
And in fact, I mean, what happened in the end was a much simpler thing because they really, she was a very vain Southern lady, and she made these really beautiful hats and wore them all the time. They were with grapes and veils and these things, and the Japanese were like, "Whoa, the hats are!" They were very impressed, and so she taught them how to make those, and she was a gardener. She was a rose gardener, and they
come
taught her
to
how
God
to cut
through
bonsai.
hats. What is this?
Well, it was a fair exchange of they taught her to cut
Okay.
bonsai, and she taught them to make hats, and that's a lot, and it worked out fairly well.
Despite the end of the world that was fast approaching.
She would get distracted, you know. It's like,
That's it.
you can't hold on to
No,
that
you
idea for very long periods of time. You just suddenly, she's doing roses and other things. So she, like everybody, that's too big a thing to keep in your mind for long periods. So.
I've noticed this tendency with our kids. My kids are between 16 and 25. There's 4 of them, and they have this thing they say now where they'll say, like, if I ever have, or when I have a house of my own, I'm going to have this or that, and then they'll say, I mean, if we still are here, right? Or if we still have houses.
Unfortunately, they're quite realistic.
But they have to, I think, just to live with that. It's not like they're going around wearing haircloth and they're just living their lives and doing the things that everyone's supposed to be doing at their age.
There was a whole generation that thought we were going to be blown up with atomic bombs, and we're digging these hideouts in their
I try to
bottom of the
console
garden.
them with that sometimes. Like so consolatory to say, well, when in the early 80s when Reagan was president, I used to go to bed every night wondering if I would wake up the next morning or if there was going to be a massive nuclear exchange when things were heading that way, and it was 1 minute to midnight.
I thought that was
You're not
the
getting
60s.
any sympathy from them on that.
What's
right?
that?
You're not getting sympathy from them on that.
No, it's very comforting to them, I think. That's why I keep repeating. No, I'm kidding. Not at all. They're just like, great, thanks.
They don't
That's
care.
really helpful to me. So is it time for questions? Okay, great. The time has come to let you guys aim some questions towards Ayala. I'll start with you.
About as a woman, so as a woman approaching the sort of, I guess, late middle age, I'm turning 55 next week. I have found that I'm in a really creative moment in my life. I feel almost like I did when I was in my 20s, and I wanted to ask, as women who are a little bit ahead of me, what has it been like for you to find these periods of unexpected creativity in the second half of your life, as opposed to the where young people are always being given awards for being, the best writer under 30 or the young, So I'm much more interested in these incredible blossoming of creativity that I see in both of your work that's been happening now and recently, and I imagine is still going to be going on. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
It's lots of fun. Well, I think one thing that is true of people in their 20s is that they don't know the plot yet. So they're actually more scared because what will, you don't know how it's going to turn out. So you're thinking, will I be able to this? Will I be able to that? Will I? What about my second novel? And it's all very well to be the most promising writer under 30, but what happens when you turn 31? Yeah. And worse than that, 41. So I think that the hardest period is the middle period, because you're not the young ingenue, you're not getting the most promising emerging whatnot, but you're also not an aged fixture. So I think you actually can get more reckless as you get older because you have less to lose. Yeah, you're also not in the sandwich generation anymore. The kids on the one hand, the aged parents on the other. So that can be quite releasing, though it involves giving things up. Your kids aren't kids anymore. Your parents die, inevitably. But there are compensations.
I think they could also give more prizes. Like a prize for the best 55-year-old person, best 57-year-old person, great at 60. There's a big gap in there.
There is.
And people are working during that and making. But you're right. It gets a little hazy around there for some reason.
Most promising writer over 70.
Well, I think that's called Lifetime Achievement
Oh,
Award.
right. Is there another question for Margaret and Laurie?
This may be your
yes.
last
Hi.
chance.
I'm just curious what each of you think of each other's work and if you have any specific examples.
We love each other.
We do. We really do.
And we had to be, we both had a shared experience as young students in school. Our names began with A.
Oh, right.
Yes, we always had to go first. Yeah. You had to go even more first than I. Yeah. Yes, everybody else then got to watch and make fun of us.
Is that actually a thing? I never thought
Oh,
about
yes,
that.
it's
Yeah,
a
I
thing.
could do better than that.
Yeah.
Like
Well, I won't make the mistake that she made.
yeah, if you'd been classmates, you could have hidden behind her.
I could have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of mutual admiration going on in the green room before we started. Yes, one more question over here. Yeah.
Could you talk just quickly about how it is being a female and a creative female, and was it all the years just recognized that you could do this, or did you feel like you were reaching barriers as a female that might not have been the same for a male?
Okay, so I'm from Canada. Canada in the 50s, there weren't any artists. There were some, but they were kept deeply out of view. So you went into a bookstore and the real books were over here, and then there was Canadiana. And Canadiana was beautiful fall foliage, Quebecois recipes, and your novel. So, and actually in those days it wouldn't have even been your novel because it was very hard to get your novel published in Canada. You were supposed to have a U.S. or a British co-publisher because it was thought in the first, up until the middle of the 60s, that there wasn't an audience in Canada for Canadian novels. So
By men or women, you mean?
By anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, it was suckier to be a male poet and a male novelist because real men didn't do those things. They were, out, mowing the whatnot or
Curling.
hammering things. It was closer to a frontier society, and you could be a hockey player. That was good, but so the male artists were somewhat defensive in some ways. But on the other hand, the group was so small that they were very happy to see anybody. Anybody turn up who said that they were interested in this really kind of not very respected thing to do. You could respect dead people. So you could respect dead English people, even dead English female people. Some of those were on the school curriculum. George Eliot, female. Emily Dickinson, they were, but they were dead. And they weren't Canadian. So so you could be dead and not Canadian and respect it. And you could even be not Canadian and alive and respected. You could be Hemingway. But to be Canadian and to be attempting to be an artist of any kind was number one, pretentious, and number two, doomed to failure. And once you actually met some other people doing this, they would say, move. Go to London, go to Paris, go to New York, do not stay. It was probably a bit like being from the Midwest. Yeah.
Who was the breakthrough? Was Mordecai Richler? Was he one of the first?
He moved to England.
He moved to England.
Yeah, he did come back. He came back in time for me to know him in the late 60s, but things had changed by then.
What was the change? What changed?
The change? I'm so mean. Okay.
Oh, good.
The birth control pill, pantyhose, and the breakthrough in Canadian literature all arrived about the same time, accompanied by the miniskirt. Do you think there's a connection? No, what really happened was that because there were so few of us, we started publishing companies. And why did we do that? It was so impossible. But we did it. And a number of them appeared about the same time. It happened in Quebec too, the mid to late 60s. It had been preceded by a period of coffee houses. Remember them? Yeah, so the coffee house, derelict warehouse space populated by small tables with candy bottles and little checker tablecloths. And you would have a jazz night, a folk singing night, and a poetry night, usually Tuesdays. And that's why was it Tuesdays? Never mind. So that's where people of my age first read their work, in the coffee house with the toilet that opened right onto the main room, and the espresso machine, the first of its kind in North America probably, which would go off just as you were in the middle of your poem. So once you've done that with the toilet flushing and the... you can really do anything.
What about you, Laurie? Do you have a...
Yeah, I can see how it would even things out with men and women. I was very lucky to come to New York from the Midwest and be part of a group that was very, very egalitarian. I mean, we're painters and sculptors and dancers and musicians, and we all kind of wore work boots and were fixing up our spaces.
Is this 1970?
Yeah.
Yeah, about right then, with the work boots.
Yeah, work boots and pickup trucks and
the overalls.
And and we really didn't think about being women or men. We really didn't. And the other thing is we genuinely did help each other. It was also partly
people did help each other.
Yeah. Would you just come over and sand my floor with me? You'd never ask that of somebody now. You'd never say, could you come over and spend 3 days sanding my floor? Like, no, get a professional. It's like,
get a professional.
Do it.
Well, it's partly the age one was at the time, you have to admit.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm sure that 20-year-olds are now saying, or say 25, they may not even be sanding floors, but they're doing something.
Well, part of the difference now is that we never thought we would make a living doing art.
No, we did not.
That was just the furthest thing. It was not. And now, if you're an artist, your parents are happy you're going to open the London office soon and have the big, emporium of, it's a really go-to profession now. And it wasn't then. So we really did help each other, and I that moment I try not to be too nostalgic about, but I really, it was a very, very special time in New York, which now has become so much more corporate in terms of what's going on in the art world, that it's a very different scene. But at that point it was also, people were doing very mixed things. So there was one year when everybody, dancers, musicians, writers, were all doing an opera. So you'd be walking down the street, how's your opera? Fine, how's yours? It was just very contagious, very, very, very friendly, very supportive, actually.
Well, I think also you've commented on the fact that we both do a bunch of different things. We did a bunch of different things because you had to do those things. So somebody had to paint the set, somebody had to make the posters, somebody had to, you didn't know how to do it. Somebody had to do the cover design. It was cheaper.
All right.
So,
That's how I learned about lights and electronics and everything.
Sure.
You just taught yourself because you're the only one who's going to do it.
You
It's
got
true.
it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Laurie, I'll sand your floor anytime. Thank you both. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all.